Hello, and welcome to episode 5 of the Backlight Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Sorba, and I'm joined today with my fellow co host, as always, Pat Farrell.
Hello, hello.
Just a reminder, if you haven't checked out any of our previous episodes, as of recording this, we have 3 episodes posted, so definitely go and check them out. It's been a lot of fun recording all of these, so definitely share, review, comment. We love it. Today's episode, we wanted to talk a little bit about diversity in film, talking about, films of different cultures, films of different backgrounds, and kind of what insight that could bring us as filmmakers and as people who love film and love to talk about film. Different backgrounds and different perspectives can bring in some really different stories that you might not think about on a day-to-day basis. So it's always good to consume film and cinema from different areas and walks of life and be able to bring that into how you perceive film. I want to start with a really funny anecdote because we were talking about this after we finished the last podcast. So episode 4 was recorded, and I'm a big coffee guy. I love coffee. I don't have a whole lot of hobbies outside of filmmaking and animation and stuff like that, but I decided that I would make a pour over before we recorded episode 4, and I was shaking the whole podcast. And I don't normally have a pretty visceral reaction to caffeine, but oh my god, I was like, I could feel myself about to explode.
It's funny because that was a really good podcast too.
I was
should do that more
full
often.
of energy. Full of energy.
I would recommend you do that more often. Think about ODing on coffee.
Okay, cool. So today I decided to try a cup of green tea so that it gives you a caffeine boost, but it's a little bit different than coffee. Big coffee snob. If you know me and you've hung out with me, you know that I have a extreme passion for coffee.
Yeah, he has a big old passion for coffee. It's kind of ridiculous.
Yeah, it's fun.
Big
shout out to my old manager that I used to work with at the coffee shop that I used to work at. He taught me everything I know about single origin varietal coffees. So it's good. We talk about film on this podcast, but you know what? Coffee's good too.
So any coffee makers out there looking for a voice for sponsorship, send us.
We're ready.
Yeah, send it.
So what have you, onto our normal scheduled program, what have you been watching recently, Pat?
I've watched quite a few things. I know it's been a little while since we've recorded, but I watched, and it was also a lot of different things. I watched Rush Hour 2 because I'd watched the first one. I love those movies. I just wanted to rewatch them. It's funny, talking about diversity in film, because the Rush Hour films are, I'd say, inherently quite diverse in cast. I mean, you have a black male and a Chinese male as your leads. And it's funny looking at the humor of that film, because I don't think, my mom and I were talking about, would it still be appropriate for that humor to exist in today's cinema language?
Right.
And, part of me, thinks it can. Part of me thinks it would maybe not be as tasteful. There's a part when Chris Tucker and Jackie Chan are fighting in this spa, and there's just a bunch of Chinese guys in bathrobes, and Chris Tucker ends up punching Jackie Chan in the face. He's just like, man, you all look the same.
Oh my god.
And, I laughed because it's funny. But I was thinking about it, and I was like, man, I don't know if that would pass for today. So it honestly got me thinking more than anything after watching that film. I watched Spider-Man Far From Home again, which is one of my favorite Spider-Man movies.
Great movie.
Yeah, we love Jake Gyllenhaal in that. Yet again, even in a Marvel film, he puts in a killer performance. I watched Chef. Chef is a film with Jon Favreau. It was written, directed, starred, produced. He went back to he did everything.
Oh my god.
Kind of went back to his roots and just did it's a really happy movie. If you want something in the midst of this quarantine, and I know you're in Florida, we'll probably go back into quarantine because our state's just a shit show at the moment. No surprise. But it's a movie that's really happy. It's a real feel good film, and it also makes you really hungry. Like he's cooking a grilled cheese at one point, and I'm like, dude, oh man, I could really go for one of those right now. I watched Ad Astra. I don't have much to say about that movie because it looked really great. Kind of going back to what we talked about in episode 3 with like director, cinematographer. I thought Hoyt van Hoytma did a great job.
Ooh.
Yeah, he did the cinematography, but the story, the film was just incredibly derivative. It basically took all the best parts of Interstellar, 2001, Gravity, and I say Gravity with a lot of hesitation because I don't think Gravity is that great of a film narratively, and just put them into one film and made it really, really boring. So yeah, so if you're into that, go watch Ad Astra. Also, I've never seen Brad Pitt go through a movie with one expression on his face. He just kind of, it's not stoic. He genuinely looks bored. Like I got bored watching his boredom, and then Tommy Lee Jones shows up, and then I get even more bored. So, and then I watched Panic Room, which is David Fincher. Great film.
Yeah.
Highly recommend. I watched Venom. Okay movie. Tom Hardy's great in it. Wouldn't really recommend. It's okay. I watched Just Mercy. And I watched Fruitvale Station. So, and I don't want to talk about those because I feel like we're going to be talking about them later. But I thoroughly enjoyed those movies. So, what about you, Mike? What have you been watching?
I actually haven't watched a whole lot recently because I've been doing a lot of work and job hunting, and my life's been
that's important
recently. So I watched 2 movies for the podcast, which I watched Black Klansman, which you've talked about pretty much every week on the podcast so far. And then that was a really good movie. And then I watched The Five Bloods yesterday.
Okay, cool.
The new Spike Lee movie on Netflix, and we'll have time to talk about those. That was also a pretty good movie. It was slow. Mm-hmm. It was a slow burn for 2.5 hours.
Yeah, it's a long film.
I thought it was a really good movie, really well done. And then I also watched The Grand Budapest Hotel.
Okay, yeah.
And that was okay. I love Wes Anderson's stop motion films. I think that they've had a really huge impact on how he makes live action films. And as an animator, I love, what he can do with stop motion and how he could take his style and put it into that. But you watch a movie like Moonrise Kingdom, and then you watch Fantastic Mr. Fox and I Love Dogs, and then you watch Grand Budapest after, and Grand Budapest just feels so unbelievably like his stop motions more than Moonrise Kingdom or Bottle Rocket or any of like his other earlier live action films. And so stylistically, the movie's fantastic. Like nothing can get better than how it looks visually. But story wise, I don't know. It felt like it would have been better as a claymation. It would have held your attention better as a claymation film. And so he has a new live action film coming out soon. Oh my God, I'm forgetting the name of it.
It's A French Dispatch.
Yes. From the trailer, it looks identical to Fantastic Mr. Fox in a live action setting. And so I'm wondering if it's going to have the same shortcomings, in my opinion, where like it would honestly fare way better as a claymated movie than a live action film.
Yeah, Wes Anderson's weird in that regard because I think that he's an incredibly stylized filmmaker. I'd say he's very Tarantino-esque in that he has certain character types and certain stories that he always tells. But then the thing that keeps the continuity together is his visual style. He has just such an iconic visual understanding of cinema. And so, when you talk about Budapest Hotel seeming like one of his claymation, it feels like Wes Anderson should have just always been making claymation animated films. And really, because his films are incredibly surrealistic. And I think that the visual metaphor that he centers everything. Everything's a centered frame. And he loves his symmetry. And I think that those aspects can be messed with and I think just made more visually interesting if you use claymation, then tell a story with actors. As you said with the French Dispatch, it definitely felt. I was like, okay, this it looks like a Wes Anderson film, but I was like, man, this would have been so much cooler had you integrated an even greater level of visual storytelling by making it animated or claymated. So.
It's such a huge feat to be able to have that level of control with a camera and a picture in live film, as you can do with like Wes Anderson. His ability to control a set, production design, blocking, performance, and cinematography all in that way in a live action sense, and then be able to transcend that into animation so that it's completely identical to your like style in live action, and then reverse it back. So he went from live action to animation and then was able to traverse back to live action with all of this new and even more exaggerated understanding that he got from animation. So it's a whole lot easier to block and create sets exactly as you want them, piece for piece, animated, because you have all of that space to work with and all of that freedom to work with. When you're on a live set, it's a lot more difficult to achieve something that feels that way and looks that way. And his live films become so exaggerated in that way that they look like they should be animated in every frame.
And
but
they
not.
Feel like tonally and the worlds that he builds, I'm like the humor's there, but you could just, it's almost like you could, it's like if I wanted to tell a story with great surrealist intent and craft a world that seems like our own but isn't, and is perplexing that way and is humorous in that manner, I wouldn't take photographs. I would paint.
Yeah.
And I feel like sometimes if Wes Anderson just paints like he does with his claymation, he would create much more unique stories and much more unique worlds. Like Fantastic Mr. Fox is fantastic. That is a fantastic film. And I think that if he just completely bought in and just like went all in on his animation style, then I think his films would be a lot. Because not many of his, he's done a lot of films and not many of them, especially live action ones, are as notable as his claymation ones.
Yeah. A lot of people know him for Fantastic Mr. Fox and Isle of Dogs, for better or for worse. I really liked Isle of Dogs. I know it's a pretty controversial hot take. But yeah, some people know him from Moonrise Kingdom, and it's kind of an offset. People are like, wow, that movie was really, really weird. Or Life Aquatica, if you know Wes Anderson for any of those movies, I've had a lot of people that have been like, God, how do you like Wes Anderson? And then, you watch Fantastic Mr. Fox and you're like, oh my God, this is such a great movie. And then you watch like Grand Budapest. It was one of our mutual friends, Angelica, who was like, you need to watch Grand Budapest Hotel as a filmmaker. She like lives and breathes by that movie. And then our other mutual friend, Caleb, who was like, Fantastic Mr. Fox is like one of the best movies I've ever seen. And he's the biggest A24 junkie I've ever seen.
Did he also say, hey, make sure you go check out A24 films while you're at it?
He loves those movies. That kind of like quirky filmmaking is totally his aesthetic. And I'm totally on board with that. And I like love that. It's not for everyone though. And so, when Wes Anderson goes to pitch a movie, you obviously know that as an executive producer, like you're getting into a quirky film. So
some people just want to watch Trolls. Some people really just want to watch Trolls.
Oh God, Trolls. And talking about diversity in film and including fictitious creatures that, oh God.
Yeah, I love how, that was kind of the most annoying thing that happened this summer was when Universal dropped the Trolls movie, right?
Oh yeah, so disappointing.
And they dropped it via, if we're going to talk about controversy and frustrating things in this podcast, in this episode, then by God, it was so annoying because they dropped this Trolls movie in the midst of quarantine while everyone is stuck at home, while children are stuck at home with their parents. And then lo and behold, it had a huge viewership online. And they're like, wow, we should just release all of our films via streaming because they seem to be way more successful. And AMC rightfully said, no, you're idiots. And I was thinking, no, you're just idiots, because you didn't realize that there were just a bunch of kids stuck at home watching these films. And all these parents don't want to be stuck with their children 24/7. I mean, what kind of parent would want to do that? So they put on Trolls. So, God, universal shame on you.
It was a good get rich quick scheme.
Yeah.
But, obviously theaters are closed, not going to make a whole lot of money, like sending your movie to theaters. Totally understand that.
Yeah.
But the idea that your film should only be watched on a screen and like that's it is such a terrible way to market your film, that you're putting out the best way to watch it, and the only way to watch it at this point is on TV at home in the comfort of your living room. There's such an emotional response when you go and watch a movie in a theater. And so, when I saw the AMC like banned Universal Films, I was like, kudos to you, AMC, because you actually took the stand to say your films are supposed to be watched in theaters. And like, while this is a really crazy time, don't just say that you're going to do this for the money making aspect right now. And it was very clearly, it's not like they tried to mask it as we want to be able to give this to families. It was very clearly, it's a get rich quick scheme. We can make as much money as we want in a short amount of time if we just put this on streaming, so let's just do it. So
and I think like
streaming's weird that way.
And streaming services, like, to me, what was really good, granted it had already had a theatrical release, and this is kind of segueing into our conversation, was I can't remember who distributed it, but it was who was the big top distributor. But with Just Mercy, what happened was it was in theatrical release, then quarantine happened, and I think it was just tailing off at the cinemas by the time that everyone got put in quarantine. And then the distributor said to Amazon, they said, we want to distribute this movie for free, given light of recent events, simply because it's an incredibly educational film. And I think it was a necessary film. And so it's all about, give and take with the streaming services. I think that Netflix was great with being kind of the first to say, hey, here's an entire playlist of movies, documentaries, and TV by Black filmmakers and Black artists. How about you take a look at these? And it didn't feel like a cash grab. It felt like there was a sense of honesty behind it. And of course, that can be perceivable. A lot of companies are just marketing themselves for the trend. But, that's what's I've been trying to watch more and more of that kind of stuff. Simply because, this is a podcast where two white guys talk about film. And I think so far, most of the filmmakers we talked about are white. Or Asian. We talked about Bong Joon-ho. He's Korean. And we
briefly talked about The Farewell.
Yeah. And we briefly talked about Spike Lee. And we'll talk about him more today. That's kind of like the diversity it's hard. It's hard because you have movies like Trolls. You have the B-list action movies of Extraction that constantly come into cinema, come into streaming, and they're just pumped out. And you consume them, but you don't kind of realize that, man, there's a plethora of other cinema and other TV that actually has a lot more meaning behind it. And whether that's that's one of the things I think it's not a hot take, but I think it's an interesting understanding of diversity in film, with regard to like the social meaning and political meaning behind pieces. Like Spike Lee is interesting with like Black Klansman and Five Bloods, and every film that he's made, he always has a political message behind it.
I was going to say that when we started talking about it, and it's a part of me that realizes that Spike Lee's films aren't for everyone. If you're not looking to get absorbed for anywhere from 2 to 3 hours in a movie that also contains a deep-rooted political message, then Spike Lee's films might not be for you, and maybe Trolls and a B-list action movie might be the more route that you want to go. And that's a very good way to look at it, that it might shift your perspective on how you view that movie and how you view that type of cinema. If you don't like movies that are so invested in political message and so heavy-handed with the message that you're trying to get across, then that, genre might not come off to some people as consumable.
Yeah.
I guess is the good word.
Yeah.
You won't have as big of an emotional reaction to it as, say, you would a Disney movie or just a Extraction,
Yeah.
And so when we talk about diversity in film, there's thousands and thousands of films that tackle the idea of being a person of color in society and what that means. Some of them take it really heavy on the political side, and some of it take it more on the personal side. And for me, a lot of the movies that take it a little bit more on the personal side when talking to other people are the more consumable versions. Some people who have a little bit more deep rooted feelings in political messages and worldly understanding of what's happening outside, can really take a Spike Lee film, like one of the modern ones, like BlacKkKlansman or The Five Bloods, and say, yeah, like that impacted me on a certain level because now I understand something that I didn't before.
And I think it's an interesting facet of being a filmmaker, of being an artist, is that typically when you're creating work, whether that be a piece of visual artwork or a photograph or music or even film or TV, you're integrating some aspect of yourself into that piece, and that aspect of yourself is representative of where you are in society and where you are in the greater existential universe. It's, you kind of don't know yourself, you only know what other people tell you about yourself. So I think for a lot of us, like when we see Black filmmakers making film and TV that has a lot to do with unrest, and it seems uncomfortable, and it seems like it's very political, very politicized. I think it's because we're so normalized to, I would say, the whitewashed versions of cinema where everything is hunky-dory and then some action stuff happens and then everything's hunky-dory again. And what's interesting is, like, when I watched Fruitvale Station, and Fruitvale Station was Ryan Coogler's first feature. I think it was 2013, 2012 maybe. And basically he saw the murder of this young Black man, Oscar, and he saw it, I believe, right when he finished grad school at USC, and then he wanted to make a film about it. So he wrote the script and he pitched it, and Forrest Whitaker, one of his production companies, picked it up. He wanted Michael B. Jordan to play it. That's what Ryan Coogler wanted. And then Octavia Spencer came in, and it's a short film. It's only about 85 minutes long, but it's just a piece of perspective. And I feel like it's a type of filmmaking that isn't backed up and isn't supported from a lot of filmmaking institutions. I know that kind of filmmaking probably wouldn't fly at JU, even where we're from. There isn't a lot of conflict really at all. It's just telling this man's life. And there are pieces of tension throughout the film. And basically in the beginning, it shows you the actual footage that was caught on phones of this man's murder by police. And then you watch, 85 minutes, and by the kind of 70th, once you're past the hour, you know what's coming, and it happens. And there was one frame that just like hit me. Is this police, basically Oscar was like telling them, like, hey, calm down, and then they put him flat down and they're trying to flip him over, and one of the officers is like got on his back with his gun pointed at his back, and the other one has his knee over his neck. And it just harkened back to George Floyd, what recently happened. And it was just like one of those images where I was like, man, like this isn't trying to tell me that, like, hey, Black Lives Matter, blah, blah, blah. It's not forcing that down my throat. And I feel like, even though that is a message that should be forced down a lot of people's throats, it just simply gave the perspective of a black person rather than a white person. It wasn't this hero that has no flaws, or the one flaw is that he likes to drink alcohol or likes to consume pills. It was a man who's faced prison time, who has a daughter, who has, anger issues at times, but who in the end is a good person. And then he dies for apparently, no reason really, except for the excessive force of a cop. And you're kind of left with that. And I feel like the gravity of a lot of black filmmakers, or a lot of black films rather, is the point of them. It's all about creating a perspective and crafting a lens through which you can see the world. And it's really educational in that aspect. It's really insightful. And I think Spike Lee, like when I think of Black Klansman and even Da 5 Bloods, like I haven't seen Da 5 Bloods yet, but I know a bit about it. Is the fact that, he tells these stories that are stories told based on true stories, not based on true stories, completely fictionalized. But they have that same gravity. Maybe they're a bit lighter because they're not as real to the viewer. They're not like a true piece of realism. But to me, that's what it's like about. It's about the gravity of the message and the gravity of the film. And I just feel like it's good that these films have that type of weight. And it's uncomfortable for us because we're so used to films with no weight at all.
Yeah. It's all really good points that you bring up. When we talk about Spike Lee and we talk about, Black Klansman and Da 5 Bloods, Black Klansman is such an impactful film, one, because it's based off a true story. So you have this African-American becoming the first African-American police officer in a mostly wholly racially diverse or segregated town in Colorado Springs. And he goes on to do some amazing things. And then, spoilers, once again, if you haven't seen any of the movies we're talking about, like, definitely go watch them before you watch the rest of the podcast or listen to it. The end of the film, they tell him to delete it. None of it happened. He goes and infiltrates the Ku Klux Klan. He stops a major bombing. He meets the Grand Wizard of the KKK and, makes all of this stuff happen to better Colorado Springs and better society and better the people that are living there. And he's told to erase it all. Every piece of evidence needs to be erased. And then everyone that was involved in that, whether they were black or white, Adam Driver's character, John David Washington's character, all of them are then let go because of budget cuts. And it seems very timely, that budget cuts happen then. And so you sit there and you're like, why? Why is this happening? Why does this exist in this context? And so Spike Lee does a lot of really creative, stylized things in the film to like make it feel more of a lighthearted message. The weird part about Spike Lee's films is that they are lighthearted, they are comedic, they do get the point across 100%, but then he also throws in little pieces and tidbits of very, very heavy-handed political monologue into all of his films. The 5 Bloods is the perfect example of that, where some of the weight becomes really like Joker. Remember in Joker, which is a not very diverse film, and brought up a lot of comments about various mass shootings that have happened in the past at different, events that have happened, and, mental stability in certain people. And in Joker, he delivers the very, very, very heavy-handed monologue at the end about, society abandoning, and a whole bunch of things happen after that. People get shot, there's a huge riot, stuff like that. And you lose all of the gravitas of the movie, all of what he's been working for up to that point on third watch. What's about to happen, and then you watch him deliver this monologue to Robert De Niro, and you're like, man, that could have been handled so much better. the writing of it. Joaquin Phoenix obviously did the best with what he could with a script like that, but all of what he's been working for, all of what Arthur Fleck has been going through up to this point is now, in my opinion as a viewer, totally frivolous, because it's all just handed to you on a platter that this is the message of the film and this is what we're going for. The Five Bloods is really good in the story aspect.
Yeah.
You have 4 characters that are all elder veterans from the Vietnam War. They all served in the Vietnam War as GIs who are African American. One of them is a Trump supporter and very, very, very conservative. When they go to find gold, he's very much like, I'm going to keep it for myself. They have the other side of that, where there's a very liberal personality who says we're going to give it to the Black Lives Matter movement. The only thing that gets in the way of their journey and getting to the end is all of their political differences and all of their different political views, and then landmines. But towards the end of the film, he has the Trump supporter Paul have some sort of a mental switch where he gives this long, crazed monologue breaking the fourth wall about being a black man in America and Black Lives Matter. And while the message was cool and relevant because it was about GIs now living in modern America who might not have been given, certain advantages of being a veteran, might not, were looked down upon by society, not the same as certain other GIs that came back from Vietnam. And he gives this Black Power monologue after being a hardcore conservative Trump supporter throughout the entire film. And you get to that point and you're like, this really wasn't the character. And so the monologue can honestly fall on deaf ears sometimes. And so it's about, Ryan Coogler does a really, 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 really fantastic job of giving you perspective. Ava DuVernay does a really, really, really good job of giving you perspective. Black Klansman does a really good job of giving you perspective, even though it is funny and humorous. And Adam Driver does a fantastic job with, the character that he's to portray as a KKK member. All of the performances are good. All of those films and directors will give you really good perspective. The Five Bloods kind of, with some of its heavy-handedness, falls off a little bit, where the message was supposed to come through. Spike Lee gives his really powerful Black Lives Matter moment, but maybe it wasn't from the right character. And that could sometimes cause some of those movies to fall on deaf ears with audiences that may not be as open to receiving a message like that. Ava DuVernay released a show called When They See Us. It was a 4-episode miniseries. And going back to Ryan Coogler and Black Veil Station, that show was a 4-hour movie pretty much about 4 men who were wrongfully accused as children, minors, 10 or 12 years old, of raping someone in Central Park because they were out biking with a group of people. And then they were released some 20 or 30 years later with no life to go back to. And what the effect of being one of those people can be, and really puts you in the shoes of what those 4 characters and those 4 men were feeling as children. They show you the inside of the interrogation rooms, how these kids were not given parental support. They were not given any kind of law support. It was just police officers and interrogators and these children who were being told what to say in the courtroom so that they would be put in jail for raping a woman. Meanwhile, they're 12 and 13 years old, and all of them are like, we've never even thought about something like this. And the people that they're talking to are just not listening. And so when you have a movie like Fruitvale Station or a show like When They See Us, it really puts me and you as 20-year-old white male, perfect stereotype for what Hollywood runs right now. It gives us a level of education that we might not have known about. It gives us the perspective of being in the shoes, in a situation like that, being in a time and place of something that we might not experience because of who we are.
I feel like basically we're so used to cinema that doesn't have a relation to the real world. Um, I wrote an article recently for my internship about kind of film and this censorship. I put air quotes around that, um, regarding films and how they're depicting race, and certain comedies and how they're depicting race. And I think that it's sometimes it can be a touchy subject. And I don't think that, I think the worst thing we can do, I think the worst thing film can do is make it so that every movie from an African American filmmaker or just a black filmmaker in general has to have an incredibly deep political and social ideal behind it.
I agree.
I think that is, it's not a bad thing because I think that film should have some meaning. Like the film we made, Happy Smile, it lacked a lot of diversity to an extent. Basically like all white crew, and a white actor, and there's a lot of white people. Mainly because we go to a school where there's a predominantly white population. But it's about suicide, and it's something that affects a lot of different people. And I could have, should I have made it about some woman who's dealing with her sexual orientation and then wants to kill herself, and make it so that the diversity speaks louder? I don't think that that's completely necessary. Just as the same thing as where if you're telling the story of a black man, it doesn't necessarily have to address police brutality. It doesn't necessarily have to address things that are integral to that person, because I think at that point we cross into a very dangerous precedent of character archetypes, and it's something that I have a problem with. With certain CW shows. I'm a big fan of the Arrowverse shows. I missed out on I think the last season because I just fell behind, but the Arrowverse shows on the CW, it's the DC Comics. They're notorious for being, and I say notorious because they're very diverse, and I think diversity is important. But I think that diversity should kind of reflect real diversity, and real diversity is where we don't all sit in a circle and sing kumbaya, but it's where there's more to your person than the aspect that sets you apart. Diversity is not the grain of your personality and your character. I feel like with a lot of CW shows, you have a character where it's like, she's a lesbian, and that's about all the depth we're gonna give her. And I'm like, well, that's not like that's, or like there was like one girl who was played by a trans actor, or actress I should say, and I thought she did a phenomenal job. I thought she was a really good actress, but it kind of, there was a good couple episodes, like most of the season, for her character where it was like, I'm trans, and that was like the center of conflict for her and the center of her character. And I get it, like they're the things that set you apart from being vanilla, from being white, because ultimately that's what it comes down to, is if you're not white, then you're a diverse. And I think that basically, because that was one of the criticisms, people saw Parasite and they're like, that's not a very diverse film, and I'm like, no, you morons. I'm like, it's a Korean film, so it's going to have Korean people in it. But the fact that you're engaging in Korean film and Korean art and integrating it into a audience and into a consumer society that is predominantly white, then you are therefore becoming more diverse. But you know, it kind of Parasite's actually a really good example. Like Bong Joon-ho loves to deal with social class and social unrest and the kind of caste systems that underlie a lot of culture within Korea, within China, within India, with a lot of East Asian countries. But what I love is that, like, being Korean, like, isn't the quintessential aspect of his characters. They're just happen to be Korean. And it's something that, I'm a big Nolan fan, if that wasn't clear enough in the past, like 5 episodes. But in his, he is an actor who I would say over his career has not been a very diverse filmmaker. He's made a lot of movies. Director, writer, producer, everything. But as a person, he hasn't made a lot of diverse films. I think of Batman Begins, and Ra's al Ghul, who is an Arabic character, was played by Liam Neeson.
Yeah,
and I'm just like there was a chance there, and what's crazy is he has Ken Watanabe play the fake Ra's al Ghul. Spoiler alert if you haven't seen Batman Begins, Jesus Christ. Ken Watanabe plays the fake Ra's al Ghul, and I'm like, oh wow, Ken Watanabe. That's I know he's not Arabic, but at least he's diverse. And then he gets killed off, and it's like Liam Neeson's actually the real Ra's al Ghul, and I'm like, cool. So we killed off the only diverse aspect of this film and replaced him with a white guy. The only black person in the Dark Knight trilogy is Morgan Freeman. And then Inception, pretty much all white cast except for Yusuf. And even Yusuf feels like a white character, but that is like such a dangerous thing and a very weird, intricate fascination to work with. Is how do you create a character that has a social understanding that where their race, their cultural, their background is essential to their character, but it is not also their character. Like I'm hoping in Tenet, John David Washington, maybe he just happens to be like a black spy who's like really cool and does like really cool backwards time stuff. Like I don't need it personally. And maybe that's me being privileged and being white, but I don't need it to where it's like I'm actually a spy because I was abused in my community and I was brutally attacked by police. It's like just be a guy that just happens to be black, just as there's guys that happen to be white, just as there's guys that happen to be Korean.
There's a perfect character example, and that's Miles Morales. Miles Morales is the perfect, and Into the Spider-Verse, the perfect character example of a character who universally could have been any race. His defining character trait was not that he was Black Spider-Man. It emphasized certain aspects of his life. So Panther being black and, the inherent learning difference between Peter B. Parker and Miles Morales. But honestly, the fact that Miles Morales is a black character isn't his only trait. His only trait is that he is a young Spider-Man learning to be Spider-Man, And the fact that his character is African American can really give certain nuanced aspects to what his personality is like. The delivery of his lines, the relationship with his uncle, the graffiti in the subway, like all of those things can be emphasized. And like the fact that he wears like Jordans, like, I don't know, they're little things that can really be brought out by who you cast. But the fact that he was black wasn't it wasn't his defining characteristic. And I loved that. And that was something that, really stood out to me, especially as you were talking about the fact that characters don't have to be, attacked by police to be a black character, and movies don't have to be about police brutality or Black Lives Matter to be a movie directed by an African American. And the person that I think of that we talked about at the end of last week's podcast is Bradford Young. Bradford Young is a cinematographer that if you didn't know that Bradford Young was African American, you would have no other understanding or comprehension of what his movies were like. Arrival was directed by Denis Villeneuve. It has Forrest Whitaker.
Yeah, Forrest Whitaker's in it. Yeah, I think he's the only black guy. And
the Colonel. Yeah, very limited, diverse cast. Forrest Whitaker does a fantastic job at being the Colonel and the main like antagonizing force of the B plot. Like, fantastic job. And Bradford Young is the cinematographer, and you would have no idea that he's an African American. And so when you talk about diverse art in painting or music or filmmaking, it is good to have those uncomfortable, very heavy political films like Spike Lee and like Ava DuVernay, and like Ryan Coogler, who have the experience, they have the background to make that film and to do it justice, do the subject material justice, and tell a really heavy, morally stimulating piece of art. There are also areas where it shouldn't be highlighted as a black film. You know, I watched a YouTube video from a tech YouTuber, Marquez Brownlee, and he, you know, this was when all of this was starting to ramp up and people were, you know, giving their thoughts and opinions, and he's an African-American tech YouTuber. And one of the things that he mentioned was, I don't want to be the best black tech YouTuber. I don't even want to be the best black YouTuber. I want to be the best YouTuber, you know? And that can extend into filmmaking 100%. You know, we don't necessarily want Bong Joon-ho to be the best Asian filmmaker, you know? Yeah. We want Bong Joon-ho to be the best Asian, or the best filmmaker in general. Yeah. We want Bradford Young to be the best cinematographer that he can be. We want Ava DuVernay and Spike Lee and Ryan Coogler to be the best filmmakers and directors that they can be. And so when we talk about characters that don't just have to be black as their character, we talk about LGBTQ plus members that their only trait isn't that they're part of that community. We, you know, not only do we want diversity in films, but we also want some sort of integration in the industry where these movies aren't about LGBTQ movies. They're not black movies. You know, they tell a message, but they're a film. They're directed by a director, not a black director, not a Asian director. And so when Bong Joon-ho won the Oscar for best film, and I think he won best director too.
He won 3. He won best screenplay, best director, and best picture.
That was a huge stepping stone for the Oscars to be like, we're no longer saying that this is the best foreign film. This is the best film, you know? And that's huge. It should be starting to get to a point where, yes, movies like Fruitvale Station, Moonlight, Black Klansman, When They See Us, 13th, Selma, they're all recognized as historically black films that have a very profound and deep meaning to them, but they're also films. They are the best films. The good thing about Black Panther, in my opinion, is that it's just a film, you know? People were able to resonate with it in the African American community on a deeper level, but it wasn't intended to be an African American Black Lives Matter protest film. It wasn't meant to be like Black Klansman or The Five Bloods, where it is a Black Lives Matter message. That movie was just Black Panther is just an empowerment film. It's just a movie about a guy who is becoming king. It's a, you know, traditional superhero hero's journey film, but because of the direction and the casting and the amazing work by Kevin Feige and integrating it into the Marvel Universe, it can resound with the community at large and also the African American community who say, these are my people. I resonate with this culture. I resonate with this character on a deeper level than just a superhero film. So, it's a part of the industry where now we're looking to get to that point where these movies aren't just black movies. They are movies. These characters aren't just diverse black actors and black characters. They are just playing characters. And so your hope for John David Washington in Tenet is a perfect, hopeful that he will just be a kick-ass spy that can do some time travel, that his only characteristic isn't the fact that he's black, it's that he is a wizard with time.
And I think it's like Black Panther is I think a really important movie to talk about, because I think people see it as like a superhero film, and people see it as not having the same sort of profound message as Black Klansman and as Defy Bloods or any of DuVernay's work is, but it's still incredibly resonant with Black audiences. And I think I remember seeing it somewhere, but it's a really fascinating point, is that as white men, right, we watch Captain America, we watch Iron Man, we watch Thor, and I'm never thinking like, oh, like that hero is representative of me. Like I never feel that, because I've lived in a society where most of the superheroes are white. Whereas for Black Panther, it was, Blade had happened before with Wesley Snipes, but Black Panther he wasn't an anti-hero. He wasn't this bad cop, good cop kind of thing. It was like, he is a good guy who wants to be king and wants to continue, crafting the greatest country on earth, which is Wakanda. And I think it was just the fact that, like, finally for Black audiences, they had a character that represented them, that they could see themselves in. And I think Ryan Coogler, he threaded the needle rather of being able to, I love Michael B. Jordan's Killmonger villain. I think that he's one of the better villains in the MCU, mainly because his motivations are representative of a greater problem within the Black-white relations in the international community. The fact that I love the opening scene where he's in the museum and it's like all these artifacts, as it's in a museum where there's a bunch of white people. And he's like, you actually stole all of these, they should be returned. But I also love the fact that he almost brings a reverse racism and a kind of branching off of like the rhetoric that surrounds the Black Panther, the Black Panthers of real life. And it was like this idea that like, oh, all the blacks are just going to go to war against white civilization and overturn them and weaponize them and just completely, and it's going to be like reversed. Roles will be reversed. And what I kind of liked was that Ryan Coogler, in a way, kind of used T'Challa as a medium through which to say, hold on, like, hold up, wait a minute. You can actually have it to where we can live together and not have to fight each other. And because we can still have a very progressive and very sustainable and harmonious society without having to go to war against each other. You can still repair the past, and have some form of reparation, but still hold some sense of togetherness and some sense of cohesion within populations. So I think Black Panther is like a really cool movie in that regard.
Black Panther it's just a fantastic film. And the other point about Killmonger that's great is it does harken to modern society in a whole bunch of ways. But Killmonger wants to give all of the resources that Wakanda has to the greater people, the people that live not under the veil of Wakanda in, California, where he was raised, where the basketball scene happens in the very, very, very beginning of the movie. And he was like, I didn't have anything when I was raised. And like, if I knew that my home country had all of this stuff, my entire childhood and my upbringing would have been so drastically different. And you can give this to the people. And Chadwick Boseman, as a leader, someone who's trying to create this harmonious country inside of Wakanda first, is very at the beginning set on, we're going to keep it here.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we don't need to give it to anyone. We want to make Wakanda the best first. And it's such a relevant message when you think about the social context of how that could be, you know, brought into modern society and modern non-superhero society, you know, where even though Michael B. Jordan and Killmonger are talking about, you know, lower class African American societies in America to a Wakandan government, and so technically they're the same. It could be 100% applied to people of all different cultures and all different races across the world. That message about who's leading and who's keeping the resources for a certain group of people, rather than potentially being able to disperse some of that to the nation. And there's, you know, a lot more politics that goes into that, but that idea that Killmonger brings up to Black Panther and, you know, talks to him about, and granted, Killmonger goes about it in a really, really, really bad way, but he has that idea that anyone can relate to. Anyone can look at Killmonger and say, yeah, I understand what you're getting at. I understand why you're doing the things you're doing. It's not right. It's not morally correct, but I understand why you do it. And you also mentioned the ability to have a community resonate with, you know, an African American superhero. We grew up with Captain America. We grew up with Iron Man. We grew up with everyone. And so we always knew our superheroes were similar to us, you know, and to have Black Panther, Miles Morales, Falcon, bring those characters into the Marvel Cinematic Universe in such a profound way that even Zendaya in the Spider-Man movies, you know, bring them in a way that, no, Mary Jane is not just a white redhead supermodel that Spider-Man falls in love with. She's just a teenager who is in love with Spider-Man, and doesn't matter who you are. You know, you can be that person. You can look up to Falcon. You can look up to Black Panther. You can look up to Miles Morales. And it's so important to have those figures that we take for granted, that, you know, we don't have to look at the screen and say, you know, is that person, why do they look different than me? You know, and it's something that's so hard to talk about and think about, but it's something so necessary to have, and something that, as you know, I look to filmmaking and I look to directors and cinematographers and characters as influences, that you have those. You have the people like Ava DuVernay, Ryan Coogler, Spike Lee, Black Panther, Miles Morales, and Mary Jane in the new Spider-Man movies, that those people are there for a greater diverse culture to look up to and say, I want to be like them. And me and you have a plethora of people to look up to, and making sure that that continues, you know, for other communities throughout the world and throughout America even.
And I think that, like, you bringing up Spider-Man is very interesting, because I remember having this very interesting conversation, and it was regarding James Bond. It was focused on, I'm a big James Bond fan, and it was, you know, it was coming up to No Time to Die, and there were rumors that there was going to be a Black Bond, and it was the fact that I forgot the actress's name. She was in Captain Marvel. She plays a 007 agent who is taking over the moniker of 007, and she happens to be Black and female. And a lot of people were like, James Bond can't be white. It can't be Black. Like, you know, he has to be white. And I remember having this interesting conversation. It was like, it's understanding how race and sexual orientation and all these aspects of the human condition that we understand are, you know, faculties of a person's personality, are they integral to a character? Are they integral to that character's definition? And when you think of James Bond, even though source material was written by a white man, and so it was like, okay, yeah, he's a white guy. The thing that I always have to explain to people, and I've, it's hard to understand yourself, but being white has no meaning. You know,
Yeah.
being white is why we can say vanilla. Because it's bland. It doesn't mean anything. There's no, like, to argue that being white is integral to your character and integral to like the personality of a character just doesn't make any sense. That's like, them breathing air is pretty integral to their character. Well, no, like it's this is stupid. Like it doesn't make
Yeah.
any sense. And I think that's the thing with James Bond is like, if James Bond were to be black, I would be like, cool, like, because to me, when I think of James Bond, I just think of a kick-ass spy, like who just
Yeah.
goes around, he's kind of the ladies' man. And I always thought it would be awesome if Idris Elba uh played James
Yeah.
Bond. I thought he would be a killer James Bond. And I see like John David Washington in Tenet is kind of filling that like Bondish style because Nolan is such a Bond fan. But when you brought up Spider-Man, MJ, like her character being white is not quintessential to the being of her character. She could be black, she could
Nope.
be Korean, she could be Hispanic, she could be any color or creed. And I think that like Peter Parker, the source material simply grants it to that basically it's he's kind of a white guy. And people could argue that, MJ, the source material. But I feel like for the most part, it was like, well, we don't need to make Peter Parker black because Marvel already has Miles Morales as the black Spider-Man, if you want to say that. There's no need to like not cast Tom Holland and cast, some other guy who's black as Peter Parker. That wouldn't make any sense. And it kind of echoes something that Michelle Rodriguez, Fast and Furious star, I remember she said it was like, you don't need to convert characters into different orientations and different races and different creeds. You can just create new characters that
Yep.
fulfill those pockets of society that simply, and it's not pockets, it's giant handfuls of society that had not gotten proper representation. um I love the Spider-Verse. I think that's an incredibly diverse film. I love the Spider-Man series from the MCU. I think that Far From Home and Homecoming have quite diverse cast. You typically have a white protagonist, white antagonist, but at least you have it to where it's like not a bunch of white people. You have Ned,
Yeah.
who I believe is Filipino, the actor, and then you have MJ, Zendaya, and then you have even the person who played Gwen in Homecoming. She was mixed, I believe. I mean, she was mixed as a
Mhm.
character, Michael Keaton and his wife. So I think it's like you have to address race and bring race into film, but it's hard to bring something to the table without addressing it at the same time and addressing it at a meta level. And I feel like that's what Spike Lee um is. He was woke before the rest of us even went to sleep. He was so much about addressing the issues and putting something on the table and talking about it and knowing that it's there, and that kind of meta filmmaking. He's cultivated an entire style, an entire like cult following because of that. And I think that is just something that he is so profoundly good at. But I don't think it's completely necessary for every single film and every single TV show to do that. Just Mercy. I watched that, and I'd say everyone should watch it. It was a great film. It was about this lawyer. Michael B. Jordan plays this lawyer, and he goes down south to Alabama, and he goes down south in the late 80s, 90s, and I kid you not, my mom and I kept turning to each other because I was like, I was like, I feel like this is like the 20s or like the 30s, just like the way the society was functioning. And some people would be like, oh well, it has like the token white person because Brie Larson plays a supporting actress in it, and then Jamie Foxx is brilliant, and then I can't remember the actor's name. but he played a fellow black man on death row who was suffering from PTSD. I thought he stole the show. I thought, like, the fact that Just Mercy got 0 Oscar nominations kind of annoys me because he was a fantastic supporting actor, and I think that like he was a way better actor than Brad Pitt was in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Was his role smaller? Yes. But like his character was like he had such an emotional connection with me. Simply because I suppose it was the fact that his struggle was something that existed outside of his character being black. Like PTSD and being in the military has nothing to do with race.
Mhm.
But him being on death row and the challenges that he faced were because he was black. So I was able to kind of put 2 and 2 together. Jamie Foxx, I can be like, man, that really sucks. But ultimately, as a white guy, I'm like, well, I don't understand. Like, I can't resonate with racial profiling because I've never experienced it. That doesn't mean I can't understand it and can't try to educate myself and can't try to, not do that. But, I can't understand it. So I thought that film did a great job at it had a message, but more so it was just about telling a story. And the story, to me, it's kind of, as you said, sometimes you don't need to say it like, you don't have to put it on a silver platter and go and feed your audience the information. Sometimes the story can speak for itself. And Just Mercy, the story spoke for itself. The racism spoke for itself. The best thing you can do with bigots is let bigots be bigots, because a lot of the time they explain the stupidity for themselves. You don't need to highlight how stupid they are. I look at David Duke's character in The Klansman. Like, he is the perfect example of, like, to me, it was all the statements throughout, when Ron is talking with one of the detectives, and he's like, the US would never elect a racist to be president. And he's like, I don't know. And it's like, I didn't need this stuff about Charlottesville at the end to be like, wow, this is so relevant. Like, I got it. And I think that Spike Lee is just like, he's a protest director, I would say, in that he always wants to put some degree of social activism behind his work. And I think that's a personal choice, but I think it really sets him apart. Do I think it makes his films vastly superior to others? No, I just think he speaks differently to others. So I think it's really, and like when I was thinking of like Korean films and films by Asian filmmakers, like when I think of The Farewell, I would say that is kind of equivalent to Fruitvale Station and When They See Us and those kind of movies, because it deals with a culture that is alien to the normal white audience member, and it has a message about that culture, and that's what drew so many crowds to watch Crazy Rich Asians, was the fact that it was a rom-com just like any other white rom-com, but it focused on a parcel of a culture and a subsidiary of a heritage that doesn't permeate to white audiences and doesn't really have a grounding in today's cinema. But I definitely agree with you on the fact that it's like, when I think of Bong Joon-ho, I don't think of, well, he's a really good Korean film director. I'm just like, he's a really good director. He's a really good filmmaker. And it's just a hard thing to do. And I worry that sometimes society can be very, we're trying to address problems with color and creed and sexuality, but you shouldn't define people by those trends. And you shouldn't make it so that, every time I speak to you, I have to address those facets of your personalities. I have plenty of gay friends. I have plenty of black friends. I have plenty, and I'm not saying that like that makes me a better person, but I'm saying that I don't recognize those people as like, I don't go up to my friend Joshua and go, hello, fellow black friend Joshua. I just go, what's up, Josh? How are you doing? Because to me, like, he's been black. He's always been black. Being black is Josh, and Josh is black. And that's what it comes down to. It doesn't make me treat him any different. And I don't think you should just treat him as a normal human being, just as anyone else. The problem is the fact that a lot of, as we've seen in today's society, is that you have black men and women who aren't being treated the same. So we're having to uplift them. And people are like, whoa, dude, but they want equal. That's too much. And I'm like, you're stupid. You have to uplift a population. Like, it's not saying that like all lives matter. Yes, all lives matter. But, when there was a bombing in Paris, we said, prayers for Paris. We didn't also go, hold up. What about prayers for Miami, yo? Like, what about prayers for New York?
Yeah.
It's like going to a kid's funeral, and then going to the mic and going, wait, all children matter. Like, it's not just about little Timmy.
Yeah.
So I'd say it's like, as white filmmakers for us, I know it definitely, when I'm like writing stuff, I'm always like thinking about, if I make this character black, do I have to have some extra aspect of his character address the fact that he is black and he exists in this world? And I think part of it is just making it so that you aren't crafting a world that is white. And I think that if you don't craft a world that's white, then you don't have to worry about that.
Yeah, you don't have to draw attention to the fact that he's African American. Yeah. It's huge. It's huge. And I'm ready for filmmaking where you don't bring on black cast just because they're black and you need diversity in your film. I'm ready for directors to not be labeled based on, what race they are. I'm ready for that part of the industry to be like, it's just a character that has some really cool traits. And guess what? They also happen to be another color from you.
Also,
so they
also
can
gender.
Yeah.
Like the fact.
Yeah, that's
what baffles me is the fact that with the Academies, I mean, Todd Phillips was nominated for Best Director, but Greta Gerwig wasn't. Are you kidding me? Like, I know we talked about Joker earlier, and we should probably have an entire episode dedicated to that, because Joker's just overrated. And Todd Phillips is, if you look at him and people are like, God, he's such an artist. I'm like, this is the man responsible for the 3 Hangover movies. Okay. He's not some like Vincent Van Gogh of filmmaking. He's just a guy who made movies about drunk guys and then said, well, how about I make a movie about a guy who is mentally unstable and kills 5 people in the movie, and then has a monologue and kills the 6th, and then, but it's all in his head. Yeah, that's gonna be the twist. Yeah. And then that gets made, and everyone loses their goddamn minds.
We could talk about Joker for a solid 2 hours. That's like Christmas edition, like Christmas edition podcast.
The Christmas special is talking about Joker.
Yeah,
but yeah, I think it's, and I don't want to put like a disclaimer on it, but I guess it's like, these are the opinions of two white guys sitting at home talking about films. But I think regardless of your color, I think if you have decent opinions and they're well supported and they have good intention, I think they still matter regardless if you're white or black.
Yeah.
Or any other color, purple.
And if you have a voice, use that voice, whether it's, you want to make a movie and you want to tell a story, it doesn't matter. Like, go and tell a story, If it's important to you, then it's important to you and you should go and make it, go and write it.
Yeah.
So, recommendations for the future: go watch Joker, or don't. It's also a good way to spend time.
I'm trying to think of like good. You should. I invite and Daniel's the one who got me into it. Every time you, either before you watch a movie, or I think it's better after you watch a movie, is go on YouTube and watch the pitch meetings. Just look up like pitch meeting for this, and they're like little funny versions of the movies. And oh my god, they're so. It was like there was one for Inception. It was like so I'm thinking about making this movie about dreams, and he's like, what do you think the music should be? How about blah? And he's like, okay, that sounds great. It's just it's so stupid. It's so great.
In actual recommendation terms, I would say go watch Joker, because you should watch it at least once. I would definitely say go watch Black Panther. And then after you watch Black Panther, listen to the score.
Yeah, scores really
by Ludwig Göransson. because the one thing that like we talk about how much we love Killmonger and how much we love Michael B. Jordan's
The
character and
808s,
stuff
bro.
like that. Yeah, it's taking his theme and combining the traditional Wakanda, like, you know, thematic elements within the music of it, and then adding in 808s and a hip hop beat over it to emphasize his
American
mix of, yeah. And oh my God. So, yes, Black Panther, go watch Black Panther and then go listen to the score afterwards and listen to Killmonger's theme and understand just how deep that movie can really be for a superhero movie. You know, it's not just a superhero movie, it's not just a Marvel Cinematic Universe movie, and it's also not just a Black movie. It's a combination of all of them, and it really does a great job of bringing in all of those elements into one.
Yeah, definitely. I second that. Go watch Black Panther. Listen to the score. Just kind of like a little bite-sized note on the score is I think that is so important. The fact that like Ludwig is a white guy, but what he did was instead of making a white score for a movie about Black people, he went to Africa and spoke to some of the biggest stars, and one of the guys who was the singer in a lot of the music cues, and the djembe players and the singing drums. You know, he got all those in the most native way possible. And I think that kind of sense of genuine understanding and that humble aspect of filmmaking, of being an artist, I think like he did such a good job. And then it comes through in the score, and then he gets an Oscar. You know, it's like, oh, look what happens when you do your shit right. Yeah. I would say out of the movies that I've watched, go watch Just Mercy. It's free on Amazon Prime. That movie was great. I think it's awesome. And then if you can, I don't know where it's available, but watch Fruitvale Station. Because
I actually think it's on Netflix right now.
Then go watch it on Netflix. Because I think it's a really, if you kind of want to see how Ryan Coogler ended up, one, working with Michael B. Jordan in every one of his big features, and two, being a great filmmaker, is just watch Fruitvale Station. It's a different kind of movie. It's just like a perspective piece, which I really enjoyed. So yeah, that's going to conclude this episode. Be sure to check out our other episodes and make sure you subscribe, like, hit the bell notification, or leave us a rating depending on how you're tuning in. Huge shout outs to our audio editor and composer, Mr. Daniel Farrell, who just recently moved into a new apartment. So congratulations.
Go Daniel.
And be sure to check out his podcast, The Scorekeepers. And so thank you all for listening. Please stay active. Please stay listening, and just be humble about all this and be willing to hear others speak before you speak yourself. So we will see you next week, everyone.